Okay, Thursday, March 18th, 2021, 7:48 p.m. I will call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This meeting is a negotiation session with SLV, Strategic Land Ventures, for 40B development at Shingle Hill on School Street, continuing in a series of negotiation meetings. So I want to open this meeting with a comment acknowledging the many letters that we've received from residents. And I know people have strong feelings about this development. And I want you all to know that we have been reading all of your letters, and we are considering them in this process. So this is a process that we think is important to the town, and we think it's important for the town to see where we can go with these negotiations. So folks need to bear with us for a little bit. We are, by all signs, very close to the end of these negotiations, one way or the other. And we'll know very shortly how it's going to turn out. But please bear with us and know that we are hearing all of your comments, and we understand all of your concerns. Structure of this meeting. So as of the last meeting, there were a couple of negotiation points that we were talking about related to sidewalks and shuttles. And we had legal staff working on a memorandum of understanding with the developers agreement that would form the actual binding contract between the developer and the town should we sign a LIP agreement with the developer. That agreement is still not in a form that we can review effectively as a board. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the developer, the lawyer from the town's lawyer and the developer's lawyer get together and spend a significant amount of time together sorting out the details of that letter. And tonight we're going to focus on the remaining negotiation points that are the high-level negotiation points between the developer and the board, rather than the legalese of the contract. And if we come to a broad agreement on those, those will be folded into the legal language, and we'll see whether or not the legal language we can reach an agreement on a legal language. So we're going to treat those two things separately right now. Since the last meeting, there have been various developments on the discussions around the sidewalks and the shuttle program. The town has acquired information and given it to the developer, and the developer has also gone out and acquired their own information regarding shuttles and sidewalks. So I think what I want to do is to, as of this afternoon, Mr. Engler sent the board an overview of some alternative proposals. And I would like Mr. Engler, if you could go over your current state of your offer, and we can discuss it and see where we can get tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeff Engler from SLV School Street. So I appreciate the summary, Mr. Chairman, helpful. So since the last hearing, we've exchanged the memorandum of understanding with town council and kind of volleyed that back once. But since then, I received a letter from the town encapsulating the discussion that the board had, I guess, at your most recent meeting relative to sidewalk and shuttle, and kind of encapsulated, I think, what the town was hoping to accomplish, which was a more significant request than what I had or we had talked in the past. So I had a meeting today with my internal team and investors, my partner, and I don't know if the other members of the board have seen the email that I sent to you, Mr. Chairman, but here are the highlights. My current offer is to build the sidewalk on our site at our expense, presuming the town, as I understand it, is going to build the sidewalk on School Street by applying for a MassWorks grant as part of, were we to reach an agreement, an overall MassWorks grant, to which the key items would be our connection to the water main and the sidewalk. So we would commit to building the sidewalk on our site. We submitted a memo to the town, which my team talked to the MMAB, and I presume the town had their own discussions and has a different read on their willingness to grant a waiver to the sidewalk, were the town to build a sidewalk on School Street to which we could connect. So we're prepared to do the sidewalk basically under those terms. We are also prepared, and this is the biggie, to give you your $1 million for your shuttle. Whether that, as I understand it, $50,000 a year for the next 20 years. We're prepared to do that. Probably a big surprise to many of you, but we're willing to do that. And that's not contingent on a MassWorks grant. We will make that contingent on, you know, us receiving a building permit. We are willing to do that. And we will offer up $250,000 for fire apparatus, not contingent on a MassWorks grant either. So none of that's contingent. Whether we get a MassWorks grant or not, the town is getting all of that mitigation. My ask in exchange for that is the town allows us to hook into the municipal sewer at our expense. We pay to run the line, we pay for all the infrastructure. The town, by its own admission and its DPW, has more than adequate capacity even after the inclusion of our development. We will pay, you know, annually, whatever usage fees the town typically charges. So the town has zero out of pocket for that. We're simply asking to connect, which to me makes all the sense in the world, not only for the reasons above, but it also makes obsolete the whole additional treatment of our discharge from our sewer treatment system, because that's obsolete because there is no discharge from any leaching fields. We have fewer waivers and necessary setbacks from wastewater treatment plant infrastructure. It allows us to preserve more trees. And obviously the town gets all the financial mitigation it wouldn't otherwise. So for all the people that are particularly concerned about the environment, this seems like a no-brainer to me, because it's a lot of the issues we've been talking about go away. So that's my offer on the table. So effectively, the town is getting everything it's asked for. We're down to 3 stories. We've reduced the height. We're giving you your shuttle money. We're giving you the Affordable Trust, Housing Trust money. We're giving you fire apparatus money, everything you've asked for, more or less, in exchange to allow us to tie into municipal sewer at our expense. So that's my offer at this time.
All right, so to clarify, previous conditions that we had had contributions to the Affordable Housing Trust The one was 250,000 up front, and the other was, I think, another $350,000. I'm gonna have to bring that back up. Contingent on the MassWorks grant going through. You are leaving those in place, is what you're saying?
Yes, as previously proposed. One is non-contingent, the other is contingent. And 250,000 of the I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, bear with me. And we had offered 500,000 previously for the town's fire department to use at their discretion. 250,000 of that would be non-contingent on the MassWorks grant. So they would get that regardless if we get a grant or not. The other 250 would be tied to awarding of the grant. And also, let me make clear, because your counselor made this point, and I think it's valid. We would structure it in a way that we are making that payment. It's not coming from the MassWorks grants. You know, that first of all, that would not be acceptable to the state. But the trigger point would be the awarding of the grants, in which case those payments would then come from SL Heath coffers.
On the sidewalks, so to clarify for the benefit of the public, town administrator proposed that we take the sidewalks that are going to be on the town property and put them underneath the MassWorks grant. MassWorks grants are very favorable towards that approach. When you're opening up a road for putting in water or other utilities, they will support sidewalks in particular if they're going to, some development. I want to touch on the MAAB granting the waivers for your development. So it is hopefully likely that they would grant those waivers if we had a sidewalk going from the town into the development. If they don't, I believe there was some discussion where we did communicate to you the notion that instead of a sidewalk, you would broaden the road to include a wide shoulder that would allow some better hope of walkable access on that road, regardless of whether or not it was an actual sidewalk. Is that correct?
Yes, Greg did mention that. We would not have a problem with that. We would work with, our traffic consultant and civil engineer, your traffic consultant and DPW to create something in lieu of the sidewalk, a widening, if you will, or something, an alternative that may be able to deliver the same intent without being an official sidewalk. So yes, we would be comfortable with that.
That would only be contingent on not achieving waivers from MAAB.
Correct. Correct.
All right. So, so as far as the sewer is concerned, so we need to talk here because the town's position still remains that we think that it needs to be on-site septic there, in part because we're still under a consent order, and in part because we do feel that it's going to be better to keep that water in the water table. So that if the shuttle is the main sticking point here on the cost basis for the sewer here, then this is something that I think we need to discuss, negotiate on.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, if the sewer is off the table, my offer is very different. It basically reverts back to what it was. I mean, so I don't frankly, I don't understand it, because the sewer provides, it's such a more environmentally friendly alternative. And we're getting criticized for being environmentally unfriendly. And this opportunity is right there. Moreover, the town is going to get all sorts of financial mitigation. Yet for some reason, the town keeps saying no, even though you have excess capacity. And if that's the position the town is going to take, then I think we go back to the MOU that we've talked about, you know, that's pending right now. And because I'm not going to change the offer that was previously on the table. I can't. I mean, I can be mean about it. I can say it nicely, but it doesn't matter how I say it. That's my message.
Okay. But what we did discuss about last time was sidewalks, and the last time when we were talking about the sidewalks, it was the last meeting where we were talking about sidewalks that was still on the table. And one of the primary reasons you decided to pull it off was the risk and expense regarding the town side, which we are now folding into the MassWorks side of the equation. So,
right, but with the sidewalk being folded into the MassWorks side, it reduces the likelihood of the full award on the MassWorks, in my opinion. And so we'll probably have to come out of pocket more for the water connection.
Greg, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I disagree with that assessment. My experience with MassWorks is that they like to see adherence to the Complete Streets philosophy, and that they would support communities and applications that do that. I was able to do that with a sewer project in a community I came from. The primary focus was sewer line. It was actually out to Tanglewood, so the BSO could have sewer. And MassWorks agreed to fund the construction of a sidewalk out. There was an existing sidewalk, but a major improvement to that sidewalk as part of that MassWorks grant.
Okay, I'm sorry, Greg.
So I think, you know, they don't always fund 100% of a project. And so, you know, say we, you know, all combined, it's, you know, it's a $3 million project for sidewalk and water. And they agree to give us, you know, 70% of that. And then I could see, you know, the town needing to pick up the 30% of the sidewalk, and SLV picks up 30% of the cost of the water line. But I think that is something that is certainly in the realm of feasible to expect from the state.
So is that a line of thinking that you would consider?
I still want to talk about the sewer. I'm dumbfounded at the town's position. Really, the town will get everything it wants, everything, and then some, to allow us to connect into a system that has more than adequate capacity. And many of the things that we're battling about go away. Yet the town is not amenable to that. I don't understand that. I mean, with all due respect, Manchester by the Sea is not Cambridge. It's not the seaport. I doubt there's, you know, I mean, how many huge projects do you have on the table? Moreover, with technology, you can increase the capacity of your system. Mr. Chairman, I mean, respectfully, I really thought this would be persuasive relative to what we were offering. With all the talk I heard about the shuttle and all these other things, it seems like it just seems like a perfect solution, but you know, I guess it's not. So that's very disappointing to me, and one I'm having a hard time understanding.
So if I may, Eli,
Sure.
so we have a major hurdle in that we have a consent order that is not satisfied yet. And while we're working on that and we think we're making good progress, we can't agree to connect your system until we have that consent order removed. So if we want to hold off on applying before the ZBA until we get that consent order completed, I think that we could talk about that. But until we have that consent order nailed down and put to bed, I don't see how the town legally can negotiate about you connecting.
Well, that's a fair point. My team's discussions with DPW and sources say the town has pretty much done everything it needs to do to satisfy that DEP. And it's just a matter of some of the additional administrative work that's required. So, I mean, yes, I acknowledge if you have a consent order, we cannot tie into the sewer system. I fully acknowledge that. But my understanding is that consent order is extremely close to being lifted. So that is, I don't think I have erroneous information, but that would be, you know, it would be contingent on the consent order being lifted.
So I think we would need to have discussions with DEP because I do not want to jeopardize our process with them. You know, when our last communication from them, the letter they sent was pretty stern in that they were not pleased that a developer had approached them to connect to our sewer system. So those negotiations and that process, which has been going on for many, many years, has been delicate. And I think we need to complete that process separate from this process before we can entertain what you're suggesting. I'm not saying that it's in the long run a bad idea. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just very anxious to keep the two separate for now and make sure that we can complete that, what we need to do for the consent order. And whether that, I don't know how long that's going to take. It could take another 4 or 5 months. I just don't know.
Yeah. Another 4 or 5 months, we're not going to be filing with the zoning board for 4 months. So, I mean, that timeline is not daunting, you know, and for the record, if you're, I don't know if you were intimating that we contacted DEP to connect into your system. We did not. Many months ago, we talked to DEP just to understand what the consent order was about. But we never tried to run an end around or talk to DEP about connecting or anything of that nature. So we listen, we respect the consent order. We understand what those mean, but we also understand that the town, and based on the information I have, is not far off from satisfying the consent order. So, but I acknowledge that if the consent order is still in place, we cannot tie into the system. But if we cannot tie into the system and we have to do an on-site system, it entirely changes what we're offering the town.
Well, it changes it from what we have, what you've stated here tonight, right? We go back to what we talked about at the previous meetings.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I follow.
So at the previous meetings, we'd reached broad agreement on contributions to the Affordable Housing Trust, to the Fire Equipment Fund, regarding irrigation, whole another slew of points. The parts that were remaining to be discussed were shuttle and sidewalks. The main points that we'd be moving away from would be the points that you offered tonight, namely the shuttle and the 250,000 for fire apparatus not contingent on MassWorks. Is that correct?
Sorry, I'm looking at the so Mr. Chairman, I would revert back to the memorandum of understanding that we submitted to the town and has been, you know, bounced back from council. You know, to me, that represents, you know, the current status of our offer and where I am currently. There's a small amount of money in there for the shuttle, which, you know, I would be prepared to live with. There's no mention of the sidewalk. There is the mention of the 500,000 for the fire and the 450 for the Affordable Housing Trust and the 250 for the Affordable Housing Trust. So that's all in there. So if you're saying, so if I understand, Mr. Chairman, are you saying that the offer in the MOU is fine if I include the internal sidewalk? Am I understanding you?
The broad
Or the
parameters
board?
of what we need, yes.
What's that?
The internal sidewalk was, yes, definitely something that we had discussed.
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing that it wasn't something we discussed.
So again, Eli, if I could. So Mr. Engler, I think you also had included in a separate email that omitted from that MOU was the discussion on water quality. And that
Yeah,
you
we're not doing the phosphorus. There's no way we're doing that at this point.
But you did agree to the nitrogen.
Yes. And that will
And
be
then-
in the MOU.
And then I believe the chair wrote to you about a correction on the phosphorus.
Yeah, I have not had a full debrief from my team, but I can tell you we're not doing that.
The 1 milligram per
No.
liter is,
Yeah. Yes, correct.
and can you explain why?
Because it's a rat's hole of testing that is not going to be required. It's extremely expensive to administer, very difficult and unnecessary, and more cost to the project that is not required by DEP under any circumstance. Moreover, we already agreed to the other things that you offered, which is also significantly expensive. Moreover, if you allowed us to tie into sewer, that becomes obsolete because there is no additional treatment necessary.
Okay.
So we're not doing that, the second part.
So, yeah, I don't know if you want Mr. Whitten to comment on that or not, but or if you want to move on, that's fine as well.
First, I'm going to ask if board members have any comments so far. No. All right.
Eli, if I might,
Sure, go ahead, Jeff.
Mr. Engler, you're saying, you know, well, if this is the case, then we're at this point with this MOU. But there were broad agreements on some things that weren't included in that MOU. And that you have unilaterally pulled out. And now you're saying we're not going back to that. So I'm not sure what we're agreeing to, given what you've pulled out and put in on your own.
Specific?
Yes, there was broad agreement on the sidewalk. And you pulled that out unilaterally. There was broad agreement on the, there was actual agreement on the standards for the phosphorus and
No, there was not. There was, you, first of all, you sent that to me 2 hours before the previous meeting. I had not had a chance to review it with my team. There was no agreement. We said we would look into it, and we've since looked into it exhaustively. I apologize if that was the conclusion that you reached. There was no agreement on that, and it was not in the MOU either. So that's not an accurate.
yeah, but the MOU as written has had some substantial holes in it, and there's some things put into the MOU that didn't
Well,
get discussed
listen,
here.
If you want to fight about it, go ahead. I'm not changing my position on the second.
I don't know what your position is. That's my point.
My position is we agreed to do the nitrogen reduction or the nutrient.
Where?
What do you mean where?
It's not in the MOU.
Right, and there's been communication since then that it'll be included.
So I think,
I'm very uncomfortable with references to an MOU that has become like a Rorschach test. Oh, I see this in it and I don't see this in it. I'm very uncomfortable with that. I need to see an MOU that we can substantially agree on.
Well, that's fine. It's not going to be hard to add that. There was, Mr. Chairman, we sent it to you yesterday or the day before, I forget, relative to our position on that. So that language, my counsel and Mr. Whitten can use directly relative to what we're going to be held to relative to the first standard. We're not doing the second standard. We don't, and that's that. If you want to beat me up and yell at me about it, fine. But that's.
I'm not beating you up or yelling at you, sir. I'm just saying I don't understand what we're agreeing to, and I need something much more clear to what the MOU is before I can say, oh, sure, we're in substantial agreement. And that's what you're asking tonight.
No, I'm not. Well, fair enough.
That's what you just asked.
I will say that I'm confident that both lawyers will be able to reflect that condition in the final version of the MOU.
so I think that what's happening here is in previous meetings, we were working primarily off of an agreements over lists of conditions that were in, English form. And then we started the process of wrapping those into an MOU. Not all of them were in there. And so we're in this sort of in-between space of having an MOU that doesn't fully represent that original English list that we broadly agreed to. And so, it becomes a little bit more difficult for us to
Mr. Chairman, I would say that everything that was in your lists short of that additional treatment is in that MOU. Could you or any of the other board members identify something else that you believe we had talked about that was not in the MOU? I basically took the bullets and language that you had provided me, either in email form or memo form, and used that as the basis of creating the MOU. I acknowledge the additional treatment that we discussed at the last hearing was omitted. I omitted it. Your counselor didn't pick up on it. It will be in the next version. are we to reach a general agreement on key business points of what I'm representing on this call relative to what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. But I don't think there's other key points that were discussed over the last 6 months that have not made their way into that agreement. If there are, please let me know.
Well, that's the point. So for example, we did discuss a snow management plan, and you had agreed to that basic provision. And so it's, if you're looking for something that's more precise as a measure of, agreement, pointing to the MOU and asking us broadly to agree to it tonight is perhaps a little bit difficult for us, because we don't want there to be confusion at a subsequent meeting where he said, at the last meeting you said the MOU was good. And the point is, we've watched the language in that document flow back and forth a bit. And one of the reasons why we decided not to couch the discussion in terms of the MOU tonight was because that language was in a state of flux. And I didn't want to get down into this potential quagmire of us talking about what's in the MOU, what's not, and whether or not it adequately represents what the town was agreeing to versus and what the developer was agreeing to. So that's where I have a problem framing the discussion on top of the MOU tonight.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I respect that. And if you do not want to talk about the MOU, that's fine. I understand that. So, I lost my train of thought. So the snow management plan, we submitted that. And I mean, if Counselor wants to, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. That's not a concern of our, I mean, I think what the town asked for, we represented on the plan that will be submitted as part of, the eventual application. But if you want some language in the MOU, I'm sure Mr. Whitten can introduce that. But a snow management plan, as Mr. Whitten would acknowledge, is customarily submitted and discussed as part of the zoning board process. So, we have no concern about that. But if you want language in the MOU, I'm sure he can add some.
I understand. Like I said, I don't want to try to parse out the MOU tonight. We'll be here in an ineffective meeting for an extended period of time, and it won't serve to actually do anything really useful. So I would rather go back to, if we're going to be discussing this in terms of previous reference points that I think were pretty well sorted out, it would be better to be working off the conditions that we previously, the list of conditions that we've previously been discussing. And I think at that point, the only things that were really still in any state of flux were sidewalks, shuttle, and potentially water quality. So I think if we, understanding that the MOU, until the MOU language is sorted out, we still have to get that done. And devil's in the details with that language, we know that. Understanding that, if we talk about the just the sidewalks and the shuttle and the water quality, then knowing that we're going to have to come back to the details of the MOU, I think that would be a good place for us to get to tonight. So, um,
Yeah, see you what?
No, it's not. He's speaking.
You keep saying that. The only time you hear the coughing is when he's speaking.
so just gonna help somebody out with a little muting action. Okay. So let's go back to where we actually stand on the sidewalk and the shuttles and the water quality. And assuming that everything was where we all agreed at our last negotiation session with respect to affordable housing trust donations, fire donations, irrigation, all of that. We're left with the changes tonight, which we are proposing is that the sidewalks remain in, subject to the MAAB ADA waivers. If you can't get that, you widen the shoulder to make the road more accessible to pedestrians. And then we fold the sidewalk operations on the town land into a MassWorks grant. And that's where the sidewalks are. And you are still okay with that?
Well, no, it depends on what you're asking me on the other points, because it all ties together. So why don't you finish what you're asking on the 3 points?
All right. The shuttle, the minimal amounts that you had in the previous agreement. If you need to make adjustments there, we can talk about that. We're not asking you at this point to put in the 50,000 annually for the shuttle that you said that you would tonight if we turned over the sewers. Just the previous amount that we discussed before, which was, I think you said was a minimal of 5,000 a year. And some capital contribution to it. And then on the water quality, what we had originally asked for was 5 milligrams per liter on nitrogen. And you've made it pretty clear tonight that you don't want to support the phosphorus numbers at all.
Correct.
And I will ask, for a little bit more feedback on that point. But those 3 things, that I think is what we're talking about.
Well, Mr. Chairman, listen, to cut a deal, I'll agree to the sidewalk. The shuttle offer is as it's written, and I'm not doing the phosphorus. That's the offer. That's my offer.
Board members have any comments?
Eli, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm just curious. I know that the original phosphorus number was unintentional. And this new one, though, is significantly lower. If I might ask Mr. Engler, how is this one more problematic?
Because it's not done, and it's very hard to monitor, and people that run these plants don't do that as a normal course of action. I'll misrepresent myself if I say I have a ton of experience with this, but I have some of the best engineers in the state that do, and they're like, yeah, this is a ridiculous request. I would not agree to it. It's a hornet's nest. And they would not, and they tell me as it is, they don't sugarcoat things. And if we can do it, or they say it's not a big deal, or, and so that's my position. People can disagree with it, but that's my position. So, we can provide.
But is this based on the new number?
Yes. The first number was clearly an error on the town's part relative to what it was asking. Even the revised number is ridiculously low. So we're just not doing it. I mean, when I go back to the point, if we do sewer, there's nothing to talk about because this is obsolete.
But we can't talk sewer because we have, a consent order. We can't talk about that. And when we're talking about, where our water supply is, and asking for nitrogen and phosphorus monitoring, it doesn't seem that unreasonable.
Based on what my wastewater treatment plant engineer, who's done many systems in many areas, more environmentally sensitive than this, he is advising me this is particularly onerous and unnecessary and not something DEP will require. Others might have a different interpretation. That's my position. I think I've made very fair and reasonable offers to the town. And I hope in the MOU we can structure it in a way that if the consent order is lifted, it triggers A, B, and C mitigation from us, and this whole discussion goes away. But as of now, we're not doing the second part of what the town has asked.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? Because I don't mean to be, and if this comes across as flippant, I apologize, because I don't mean it to be that. But as this is a negotiation and collaboration, I would be curious to hear from the board what the board thinks it's offering to me as the developer. Because whether we come to an agreement or not, the project is going to go forward, albeit with, instead of 150 units, 135 units. But that application will have no sidewalk. There'll be no affordable housing mitigation payment. There'll be no payment to the fire department. There'll be no additional treatment to the treatment plant. And some of that stuff, we'll see where the things go at the zoning board, and that's a different discussion. But it seems like I'm giving everything. Like, I'm curious what the town thinks that it's providing.
Oh, certainly not true. I mean, obviously, if you were going to be going to a hostile 40B, you wouldn't be getting a MassWorks grant, and the MassWorks grant is going to pay for a considerable amount of your infrastructure work. It's not insignificant at all. You gain some speed with respect to getting to the zoning board of appeals in your project. I know you don't feel like this is a speedy process at all. I've heard differing opinions about whether or not it is or is not. I think it's probably considerably quicker than if you were going through mass housing. And then, as you stated many times before, you benefit from the political cachet of it, or as it were, of the board having endorsed your project. And if Mr. Whitten wants to add to it, I'd appreciate that.
But Mr. Chairman, but respectfully, do I? Because every time we try to write that in, Mr. Whitten pushes back that, the board doesn't, by the nature of the signature on the lip, the board supports this with, technically that's correct. But the political support is very important to me. I mean, that's really the only reason I'm doing it. And I don't know that that's there. I mean, I'm just being candid. So that's why I'm doing it. The project, the square footage on the project is no different in either way. And the mass housing project goes back to the original height. I mean, so listen, we're both joined at the hip in some ways at this point in time. We both have, you know, we both have plenty to lose, but I think people need to understand, and I have not had the benefit of reading all the letters, but if the Board of Selectmen and we do not reach an agreement, it does not mean the project is going away. It doesn't. I mean, I'm pregnant on this project, and you know, we're in it for the long haul, however long it takes. So I really want to get to a deal. I really do. But you know, I can only do so much. If you guys ask and ask and ask, and then I can't get this project financed, that doesn't do either of us any good. Because you'll have all sorts of things I'm committed to that I can't deliver upon because the numbers on the project don't make sense. So, and I'm really right on that line right now. And with each additional ask of $100,000, $50,000 here, it adds up. It does. So I'll stop talking, but you know, that's kind of where we're at, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so one way for us to approach this right now is tonight you've said that you gave an offer when you came in. We're not agreeing right now to go with the sewer support. I know you want to, but we're not agreeing to it. You are willing to do the sidewalks and under the provisions that we have talked about tonight, and you're willing to do the shuttle to the previous specifications of 5,000 per year and the 75,000 capital input. And on the water, you're only willing to do the 5 milligrams of nitrogen at 5 milligrams per liter, and you're not doing the phosphorus. And that's your offer at this point.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So if we were to, finish this meeting here, then it would be incumbent on the board to think about your that combination and see if we were willing to agree to it. And in the meantime, the legal language has to be sorted out in the MOU, which there's, like we said, that's gone back and forth. And the devil's in the details. And one of the reasons we didn't talk about it tonight is that it's not in a state where we could reasonably parse through it. So lawyers have to reach agreements on that. And what I would propose is that they do that. And if that means that you and Greg need to be talking to them at the same time regarding logistics and technical details, that's fine. And that it be written up, given the main principles that regarding sidewalks and water quality and shuttle that we just talked about. And then the board has to make a decision about whether or not it's, comfortable with that final mix. Plus the MOU actually has to come together. Is that a fair thing to say?
Is that a question for me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a fair thing. Listen, I've been involved with plenty of transactions, and if we're in agreement on the key business terms, I don't have any reservation to say that the lawyers will be able to work on the language with the board saying we want this deal, and with me telling my attorney we want the deal. Yes, there are some, providing there's nothing egregiously in conflict with general legal practices, I'm not concerned about Jason and John working out the language. The business terms are the big ones. So I think you've summarized it correctly. And if that's what you're telling Mr. Whitten to reflect, I'm confident he'll reflect that, and my attorney will work with him and we'll get an agreement. I guess my question is, would the board entertain in that agreement a contingency that if the consent decree is lifted, then A, B, C, and D happen? I would hope that that would be acceptable to the board. I certainly acknowledge that with the consent decree in place, we can't tie into the sewer. But if it's lifted, which even within a 3 or 4 or 5 month time frame, I think would be a great benefit to both of us. So hopefully that is also amenable to the board. But you did summarize, Mr. Chairman, my understanding of what we just talked about the last 20 minutes.
So with respect to the sewer, I don't believe the board's opinion has shifted on that. So I don't think that we would support such a contingency in an MOU.
Okay, fair enough.
Board members have any other topics that they want to raise on the main points that we've discussed in the past? Jeff?
Different than the topics that we've been discussing tonight so far.
Yes, if there's anything that's
One of the things that I'm concerned about in reviewing the MOU that I've seen is a shift in something that was agreed to very early on and has not made it into the MOU. And this has been my concern about the MOU to date, is that there are things that we agreed to early on that have not been included. And that was at the very outset of these negotiations. We said that if we were to come to agreement in this matter, that the remainder of the parcel would go into a conservation restriction. And you right off the top said, no problem, I can agree to that. And the language that I have seen in the MOU indicates that that's perhaps not the case. And I'm very concerned what that means in terms of other agreements that we've had that have come and gone in the MOU, come and gone in sort of what you're referring to as the key business items or key business agreements. That was an agreement and it hasn't made it into the MOU. And there's indications in the MOU that that you're pulling back from that agreement.
Well, first of all, I'm confused because on page 5 of the MOU, it says the developer will agree to a conservation restriction for undeveloped land. And there's a whole paragraph on that. So we are agreeing to it, albeit I know Councillor Whitten had some concerns about the language, and I've instructed my attorney to work with Councillor Whitten so the town is comfortable with that. But we don't have an issue with that. We just don't want land put into a restriction that, we need for some of our infrastructure, some of our, wastewater treatment plant. But anything we're not using, we'll figure that out. I'm on record as saying that, but respectfully, it's right in the MOU about the conservation restriction.
On page 1, footnote 1, per the terms of the purchase and sale agreement between the seller and the developer, a portion of the property shall be retained by the seller to be determined after the issuance of the comprehensive permit. How does that affect that?
Well, that's a different issue. The seller, per our agreement, is retaining part of his land, but that's not developable. It has no relationship to our land. It will not be developed or built upon, so.
So are we talking about the parcel that,
The parcel that we will control as part of our purchase and sale agreement, whatever we're not building on, there will be a conservation restriction on. We cannot put a conservation restriction on land that we will not own.
but we were led to believe in the very first session that you had control over the entire parcel.
We have control over what we've represented, we have control over. The owner is retaining a small portion for tax reasons. So that's not going to be built on. I'm not sure what the concern to the town is.
So I think it'd be helpful just to talk about acreage.
Okay, so
Well,
yes,
I'm
I
sure-
mean, you're talking small portion. I'm concerned about,
To the
the
board members,
understanding we had was that you had control over the parcel when you represented to us that you would be comfortable putting the entire parcel into conservation restriction, except for the land that you needed to construct on.
correct, the part that we, in accordance to our agreement, will be purchasing. But if Counselor Witten and my lawyer want to write in something about the restriction of both what we own and don't own, we will have to go back to the seller, but I'm comfortable that we'll be able to make that work. If your concern is that there's going to be some future development or phase two or any, it's not, there isn't any. I mean, I can't say that more emphatically, so.
My concern is what Eli has referred to several times as the devil is in the details. And the details that you represented were that you had control over the parcel.
We do have control over the parcel.
But now you're saying that the seller has control over a portion of it.
Yeah, a very small, insignificant portion that will never be built upon.
So which portion that you've put in the MOU, MOA, whatever, and is the portion that the owner is retaining? Because you know what you've put in the proposal shows the entire property.
Right.
So what-
We can provide an exhibit. It's a small amount.
I think that would be very helpful. It would certainly, you know, we need that clarification.
Tell you what.
Can you tell, I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Eli.
So what I would, so the point is, if there's going to be an agreement that's going to manage to get signed, the devil in the details will have to be sorted out. So there's obviously concerns about board members about how we get to making sure that the details are what we accurately represent what we expected originally. What I would propose is that board members, submit to our lawyer a list of any list of concerns around the original conditions that we had written out in a list and discussed at our previous meetings, and ask for those concerns and questions to be answered up front. And then the two lawyers can sit down and talk about those, the legal language of them and how it maps to what we originally thought the intent was. And we can find out that way if there's actually any significant differences between what both parties think is going into that agreement. And if we try to chew through it all tonight, I don't think it's going to be effective. It's going to be easy for us to get started on that and never get out. And I don't think it'll be necessarily effective. It'll be contentious. But I do think it's going to be critical for us to work out those details if we're going to get to actually signing on the dotted line.
Mr. Chairman, so we're going to start getting just a laundry list of things in the MOU or for Councilor Whitten to include? I mean, I'm not concerned about the point that was just raised. I mean, I understand the board's concern. I'm quite confident we can make the board comfortable and your lawyer comfortable with the language. I would be curious while we are on the call, what other items are out there that people feel are not in the draft version of the MOU, other than the sidewalk? Because, Mr. Chairman, I feel like we have a document here that's not that far off, all right? And we talked about 3 key business terms tonight relative to the sidewalk, the additional treatment, and the shuttle. Okay, so let's just for discussion's sake say we're in agreement on those 3 and they make their way into the MOU. I don't think we're that far off from the MOU. And I'm confident once again that Councilor Whitten and my attorney can work out some of the legal language, understanding that both parties are trying to make a deal. But if all of a sudden, like, you know, a dozen new things are coming in that we haven't discussed or variations on things that we discussed, you know, I don't think that's going to be particularly productive. I'm not, the board can do whatever it wants. I certainly respect that. And you can ask for whatever you want, but I've made it clear relative to my timeline on this. And I'm still hoping that, presuming you meet 2 weeks from tonight, we have a clean version that the board can vote. So that's still my hope and expectation. And I think 2 weeks is ample time for the attorneys to volley this back and forth a couple times, understanding that the business terms have been agreed to and some of the legal language needs to be worked out. If I'm missing something, please let me know.
Mr. Whitten, any thoughts?
No, Mr. Chairman, 2 weeks is sufficient time, certainly for me to go back and forth with Mr. Engler's counsel. I think the board has put forward, I think, a reasonable proposal for tonight, and let us work out some of the details to the extent that we can. The unresolved details will come back to the board anyway. And I think at this point, it's now down to drafting the language.
So in addition to that, I think if the board, as they look at the current version of the MOU, if they have a question or concern, either get it to me and I'll get it to John, or send it directly to John Whitten, to make sure that he's aware of that concern and that he is working with SOV's counsel to address those concerns. I think that process can work. And those concerns are all going to be based on the original list of conditions that were agreed to in principle. And I think
Understood, but I'm still, I mean, I'm struggling to understand what, I mean, the snow removal was brought up. We submitted a plan. That plan will be included in our comp permit app. It will be a condition of our permit that we adhere to that. What other things have I missed I mean, and maybe people off the top of their head don't know, but I really think the other things that we've spent the last 6 months talking about have made their way into the agreement. With that said, if I did miss something, please provide it to Councilor Witten, but I'm hard pressed to know what those things are.
Right, so exactly, just allow the process to unfold over the next 2 weeks, and I think there's a probability that we can get to an MOU that people can feel good about. We'll see.
So tonight is the 18th. 2 weeks from now is April 1st. Seems a bizarre date for us to be having a meeting. But is that the date that you would like, sir?
That you're putting that to me? I mean, it doesn't have to be April 1st. If there's another night the board prefers, you know, that's a Thursday. I mean, we could do the 30th, we could do the 31st. We could do the 5th.
I think
So, you know, I think the board will want to look at what is the proposed final version as a group prior to meeting with Mr. Engler again.
that's right. And our next meeting is on the 5th.
So can we do it on the 6th?
Hang on. It would appear so. Greg, do you have any reason why we can't do the 6th?
No, I don't. As long as we can have the larger platform, I think we'll be okay. I'm not aware of a conflict for that night.
All right. So. April
You know, I have a personal conflict for that night, but I will see what I can do about rearranging.
All right. Other board members? All right, with the 6th?
Fine.
All right.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, just so Mr. Witten and my counsel are authorized to engage. I think Mr. Witten as my counsel couldn't join tonight, but I think Mr. Witten and I are clear on, I think, how we left those 3 key terms, and we'll get that included in the MOU. And I know other members are clearly interested in the conservation restriction, and that language, we'll get that sorted out. And I'm confident that we'll come back after a volley or two with an agreement that Councilor Witten hopefully is okay with, and that I'm okay with, and we'll get that to the board as ASAP.
All right. And then
Eli,
April
may I?
Go ahead, Becky.
Becky.
I just would like as soon as possible to get clarification on the property. And specifically what portion will be being retained by the current owners. How much it is and where it's located.
100%, we understand.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Eli, are you assuming that the board is comfortable with phosphorus being taken off the table?
I didn't say that. I said that we were going to have to consider that. The point here tonight is that we have been provided the final offer. It's going to be put together into that MOU, and then we're going to vote on it on April 6th. My point was, I believe that we have established that we have reached the final set of conditions that both sides, I don't see us, moving any further on where we are. Whether or not we support it, this is what's before us. It's not going to change. This is what's going into the offer. That's it.
I would like to ask Mr. Engler to identify the projects that this phosphorus standard was, that he mentioned about the phosphorus standard.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
You said that my engineer, my wastewater engineer has worked on projects where these stricter, tough phosphorus standards had been used that were nowhere near what we're asking for. And I'd like to have you identify what those projects are, please.
All right, fair enough. Mr. Chairman, can I ask a request?
Yes.
I would like a straw poll of the board relative to all the points. If the phosphorus thing is a sticking point, let's save Mr. Witten's time and my counselor's time and all the other things. Because if we're in agreement on everything else and the board votes it down because of that, why waste our time over the next 2 weeks? Doesn't seem like a very good use of time, or that if people are hung up on that, why go through the whole machination of getting to an MOU if people are going to vote it down? I know we only need a majority vote, so, but that it doesn't seem like a good use of everybody's time.
That's simple.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond to that?
Sure, go ahead.
I understand Mr. Engler's request, and I can understand why he's asking for it. But my advice to any elected body is never, ever respond to a request for a straw poll. It's improper. It's totally inappropriate. It doesn't give the board the adjudicative power and authority that it has. It tries to strip it away. So respectfully, my advice to the board would be not to respond to a request for a straw poll. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Request withdrawn. How about that?
Eli, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
you've asked us, the board members, to go over our lists and notes and come up with things that we think were either proposed and ignored or proposed and agreed to that didn't make it into the MOU that we most recently saw. Some of those may have business implications. I don't know how we're going to propose how I'm going to send my list to Mr. Witten, and he, without knowing whether the rest of the board agrees with me or whether anybody else's recollection agrees with mine. I don't see how we're going to resolve all of that and have a document that we're prepared to vote on in 2 weeks.
So I do have a thought on that, but I think I'd like to hear if Mr. Witten has any comments before I make mine.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think that the reason to submit the comments to Greg or me is just to avoid an open meeting law deliberation problem. I'm certainly comfortable, and I suspect Greg is as well, accepting the board's comments on either wordsmithing or suggestions on the draft that you have before you, or things you felt were left out. And then I will do my best to incorporate them as red line or as questions or as comments. So I don't see any downside. I understand Ann's question, but I don't see any downside to the board submitting its concerns, comments, changes it would like made to me and or Greg. And then I will be very careful in including any of those comments in the draft to identify that they're either from one particular member and haven't been vetted by the full board, or they're inconsistent perhaps with what other members have said. So I can do that. And I think that's a fair way to approach this because of the open meeting law issues. So I'm comfortable with that approach if the board is.
Yeah, and what I was further going to suggest is something very similar to that. If Mr. Whitten does find that there are conflicting goals or interpretations among board members, he can observe that, note it, and if necessary, we can have another board meeting to resolve that among ourselves before the meeting on the 5th. I hope not to do that, but we can leave that option open.
And suppose our recollections don't agree with Mr. Engler's recollections. I'm uncomfortable voting on a red line document, and
Well, I hope we don't have a red line document. I will say, I hope the board, we have a version that we submitted to Mr. Whitten and Mr. Whitten bounced back to us. I understand there's 3 key terms tonight that we need to get included relative to the sidewalk. The shuttle, I mean, I think is written as is, and we'll add the part about the additional treatment. I hope the board can recognize, though, if it starts asking for other things that have dollar values assigned that we have not talked about tonight or the previous hearing or the previous hearing from that, that is going to change, you know, basically there's a pie here. How we chop that pie up is what we're talking about. So if the board starts introducing new things that have a dollar value assigned to it, I mean, I hope the board recognizes that the target is moving. Some of the legal language that one of the members raised, I'm confident Mr. Whitten and my counselor can work that out so the board's satisfied. But if you start introducing things that have a significant dollar value attached to them, I don't know what they would be, to be honest with you, but maybe we missed something. That's going to impact some of these other items. I'm sure the board is aware of that, but that's just where we're at. So, but listen, I know the board has fatigue. I have fatigue. We need to have an agreement, or we need to have a working version at the next hearing. It sounds like you have a couple meetings prior to the 6th. Maybe not every I is dotted and T is crossed, but on the 6th, we really have to have an agreement that the board can take a vote on, subject to maybe Councillor Whitten adding a couple things here or there, or cleaning up a little bit of language. But we can't keep dragging this on. There's other factors at play that have a major impact on me. And, you know, we've been at this a long time. I sincerely appreciate all the board members' time. I genuinely mean that. I know the position that you're in. I know that there's people in town that are coming down on you extremely hard. I know there's a lot of people in town that are supportive of this that are scared to say that because they're ostracized, because I have friends that live in Manchester. So I know you're in a tough position. I do. I sincerely do. And I really hope we can come to an agreement. And Councillor Whitten is a great attorney. My attorney's good. I think we'll get there. But, you know, if the target starts moving, I just think it's going to be problematic. But let's see how the process plays out.
Sure. So I think that, just to clarify, I don't think that the thinking was that you were going to be subject to an array of capital requests. Um, I think that um, as things get turned into legal language um, and details get wrapped around them, if there are any questions or concerns that board members have that can't be turned into something that's not actually a red line copy by the April 6th date. I think that's what Ms. Harrison was really addressing. Is, what if there are disagreements about some of those fine points on April 6th? But you've addressed that in your comments here. Let's try to get to that document on April 6th, which is as much as possible devoid of any red lines, and see if we have an agreement.
Sounds good to me, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So the discussions continue. Do board members have any other comments? Mr. Whitten or Greg, any parting thoughts?
Not for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
No, I'm good, Eli. Thank you. I think we've got our marching orders.
All right. Then I think that I'm going to take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, roll call vote. Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Bodmer Turner,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. One more of these meetings to go, folks. One way or another.